think it's so powerful all the time. You know, when you look really beautiful, you feel the power. We know how to take the edge off life. That's not to be underestimated, even though they've literally spent like the last 300 years being like, that's got no value. That's got no economic value, but get into my house and do it for me for free.
I'm Jasmine.
And I'm Maggie, and you're listening to Culture Club. This is our monthly interview series where we sit down with a guest to chat all things life, culture, and creativity.
Today we're recording on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nations. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander listeners today.
Lucianne Tonti is an Australian-based fashion expert, author, and journalist. She's the fashion editor of The Saturday Paper, sustainability editor of ELLE Australia, and a contributor to The Guardian. In 2022, Lucianne published her award-winning book, Sundressed, Natural Fibres and the Future of Fashion, which explores the garment industry and how regenerative fibre farming can help revolutionise the future of clothing.
Now, Lucianne has written Good Witch, a brand new non-fiction book that explores how the witch hunts were the catalyst for much of what is wrong with our world today. Climate change, our disconnection from nature, and the corrupt patriarchal systems. Good Witch looks back at the witch hunts that swept Europe and America in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries and explores how witchy or women's work like gardening and textiles is regaining popularity in the current moment. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lucianne.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yay.
I love this vibe. It's so good.
We're so excited to talk to you about all things witchy. Up first, do you consider yourself a witch or witchy?
I would say that I am witchy for sure. I get my numerology done every year before my birthday. I have a bowl of crystals beside my bed. You know, I'm always thrilled when I'm ovulating or menstruating on the full moon or the new moon. But I don't have an active kind of witchcraft practice, which, you know, a lot of people do. So I don't want to take that, use the word witch lightly. But I think there's something in it, right? Everybody kind of resonates with the idea of being a witch at the moment. Do you guys think you're witches?
I think so. I think I'm very intuitive and I like leaning into it. Like I love leaning into astrology, looking at traditions as well. Like I'm getting more into looking back at Celtic traditions.
Okay, love that.
My aunt threw a winter solstice party and
Love
I feel
that.
like a lot of women in my life are reconnecting with their witchy side again and being less shameful about it.
Yes.
We're going to get into it.
Yeah.
But I want to know if it's part of the cultural moment.
I mean, it definitely is, right? You feel it everywhere. Practical Magic 2 is coming out this year, which is a big thing. I mean, I know obviously my algorithm is now skewed because I've written a book called Good Witch. But yeah, it's a huge part of the cultural moment. And you see people talking about it in different ways, right? Like we have experts who are like, these practices astrology that you flag, tarot, they're give up people the opportunity to kind of self-reflect or feel like they've got some agency because, it's a particularly turbulent political moment globally and with climate change on the rise and, we look like we're on the brink of systems collapse. I think it makes sense that people want to tap into their witchy sides.
But there's a big difference between kind of what you're talking about now, so practical magic, even tarot cards and TikTok witches, if you want to call it that. So the witches we know from pop culture and the witches that you have in your book. That was a big, I think before I got into this book, I thought he might be going one way, right? The witches that we see in the 21st century, but it's not. Can you talk to us a bit about the witches you chose to put in your book?
Yeah, so so I'm a journalist, right? So I trade in I try to trade in facts and research. And so I think the entry point for a lot of people into believing that there is something bigger at play and entertaining the idea of witchcraft starts with what we've been talking about, tarot and astrology. Astrology does have ancient roots, but tarot is relatively new, but obviously Celtic practices go a long way back. And so I was really looking for, it started out very much as me kind of going, well, really what happened during the witch hunts? What was this moment in time? And I was looking for ways that we can transcend and connect to bigger things in our lives that were still grounded in kind of this reality. And so the witches that I look at they're very powerful women. They were deriving power from the natural world. So they were deriving power from gardening and subsisting from the land, or from growing fibre and weaving textiles, spinning yarn, or they were they knew how to harvest herbs and how to make medicine, and they were healing people in their community. Or they had really strong friendships, which I think is something that we underestimate about how important women's social power was pre witch hunts, and then also just like this the thing that's kind of ephemeral, that's kind of hard to land on, where it's, as women, we do have this powerful connection to the natural world, and as people we do as well. And it was a belief system that was really widespread, also pre-witch hunts, that nature was enchanted, alive, imbued with sacred spirits, and that we had an obligation as humans to protect and to nurture and to sustain it. And yeah, so that was kind of my entry point to these witches, and it was very interesting what other kinds of magic like popped up along the way.
You're a fashion journalist by trade, as you've said, and your last book was about sustainable fashion.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get onto the topic of witches?
So it's actually kind of a neat entry point. Like I was on a tour for Sundressed, and I was in San Francisco, and that's on the outskirts of San Francisco, and Point Reyes is where the head of the regenerative fibre farming movement began, and that's a movement called Fibres. And I was visiting their headquarters, and I just had like an epiphany. Like when you work in sustainable fashion, we've had these conversations. Like the systems that are up against you from improving the industry feel just so entrenched. Like it just feels like a given. We're going to exploit the environment, and we're going to exploit women's labor, and we're going to keep producing crap, basically, like, overproducing clothes. And anyway, so I was at Fibre Shed, and I'm getting a tour of the property, and, behind the house, there's a meadow where they're growing dye plants. There's a stream that's like flowing down beside this enormous old tree, and there's a circle of stools, and, where they do weaving. And then we got into the dye shed, and it was like cauldrons everywhere, which were obviously being used, like big saucepans being used to dye the clothes, and little vials of powders, and, drying herbs. And I was like, well, my mind was pinging, like, this is the iconography of witches. And I went away, this was in 2023, I went away and I just started to pull at that thread. And you see very quickly that the iconography of witchcraft was often aligned with with women's work, and, symbols like in Sleeping Beauty, for example, what happens? She gets cursed by a witch to prick her finger on a spindle, and then she's going to sleep. Well, she's going to die, but they change the spell so that she'll sleep for 100 years. And that kind of happens all the way through the fairy tales. And so also because so much of fashion, the system changed around the time of the Industrial Revolution. And what you see, one of the first things I learned when I started my research was that the 300 years the witch hunt spanned, from the middle of the 15th to the middle of the 18th centuries, were the 300 years leading up to the Industrial Revolution. And that's like when you have that realization, you're like, okay, hold on. This system that we live under now, with, all of its flaws, and it's extracting from the environment and exploiting women's labor, like, it was born on the tail end of 300 years of the persecution of women.
This part in the book, and you kind of reveal it early on, it blew my mind. I'm just going to read out a section. So you write, "The witch hunts marked the transition from a world where we understood everything to be alive and interconnected to one where the earth was seen as a lifeless resource to be mined, pillaged, and ploughed. The first thing to appreciate about this transition is the timing. The witch hunts were ending just as the Industrial Revolution was getting started, alongside capitalism's dominance as an economic system." I don't think we talk about this when it comes to the witch hunts. And why is that?
Well, they get dismissed as like, oh, this spooky time in history, like, and it's like we've almost deliberately associated them with like, with riding broomsticks and black cats and, casting spells in the forest, and like this very kind of cheap, like, I went to Salem. It was the first place I visited on my research. And like what's happening there is really perverse, because you have like this deep traumatic history where 19 people were killed in the name of witchcraft in a space of 6 months. But like this witchy tourism, like, laid over the top, where it's like ghost tours and, dress up shops and Harry Potter stores and, really kind of tacky paraphernalia and there's also something else perverse happening because you've got all of these tourists gathering here to learn about something, this tragedy, this like state-sanctioned murder of mostly women and, 14 women and 5 men. And but actually what you're learning about is very, very gruesome and not at all, it's not a fairy tale, but so I think there's a lot to kind of unpack there about what we think. And I also just think feminism is so new. That was the other realization I had. I was like, okay, well, actually we're only 100 years into feminism, and it means that like kind of our generation or my generation and your generation, I should say, is we're looking around and we're going, wait a minute, they told us when we were kids, my mom's a doctor. Like I grew up being like, it's done now. And now we're actually all going, hold on a minute, like maybe we got equal pay 50 years ago, but what else is happening in society? And can this social system that was, born out in the cradle of the witch hunts actually ever be properly equal for both genders?
In the book, it feels like there's peaks and valleys of this like witchcraft phenomenon that like rear its head and then it will die down a bit and rear its head. And now it feels culturally like we are in one at the moment, like a peak, because it is a time of uncertainty. Why do you think that witchcraft and conversations around it peak during uncertain times?
So there's so many layers to this. Like the first one, like off the bat, is connection. Witchcraft gives us an opportunity to connect to the natural world, whether it's just, looking at the phases of the moon or astrology or the migratory patterns of birds or like, what flowers are coming into bloom. And that's not something, especially at this moment in time with what's happening with our phones and how, in screens we are all the time. Like we're really so removed from our connection to nature. And the second one is the connection to the body. So witchcraft, like whether it's breath work or yoga or like whatever kind of transcendent practice you would like to engage with, it brings you back into the body and out of the mind. And, that's also something that we're like struggling to find as humans, even though it's like we're supposed to live in the body. We're not supposed to live in the brain all the time. And then the third way is it brings us in connection to each other. And that's also super important. And, our lives are getting more and more isolated and siloed. Because that's like the engine of capitalism, is individualism. And so, so there are those three ways, which are not to be discredited. They're extremely important. But there's a deeper layer that I think is going on at the moment where it's like we have a sense, all of us, I think, have a sense that there is a different way that the world could be structured. And we could be living our lives in a different way. We're looking at this system and it is broken. Income inequality is, what do they say? It's like the same as it was before the French Revolution. Like the wealthy are getting wealthy without even having to try. And everybody else is like, why can't I pay my bills? So it's broken in that way. We're looking at, we've been warned about climate change since the 80s now. And, it's devastating to watch the scientists go, wow, it's here. Climate change is here. It's arrived faster than we thought it was going to, and we are scared at how rapidly the world is warming. And, when you see countries like, you're probably about to experience it when you go to Europe, when you're in those built-up cities like London and Paris, when there is a heat wave on, it's not like here. You can get relief here. Nobody in those cities can get relief. Like unless you are very, very wealthy and you have aircon installed, like it is disgusting. I was in Paris at the end of May and it was the heat wave then and it was foul. Anyway, so we all know the system's broken. We want to figure out what it looks like and so it makes sense to me that our entry point for figuring out what that change looks like is witchcraft, 100%.
And back to the industrial revolution of it all, right? Because and for many reasons, of course, we herald this time and period as an incredibly innovative period where it's changed a lot for our lives. But what I didn't really realize is what life was like before it. And you talk about the commons, which I'll get you to explain in a second, and also, the lack of private land ownership. There were all these like nice morsels of things which I'm like, hey, let's bring that back. So can you tell us about the commons a bit?
Yeah, so the commons was, it was a different structure of land ownership. So a common right under the law is like you might not own the land, but you have the right to use it. So you have the right to go into the forest or into the meadow to graze your animals and, and to forage for berries or nuts or herbs or whatever it is. And, it meant that there was this kind of way that people were living that was like really able to kind of be in harmony and subsist from the land. And I think that, it's a big thing in the UK. Like I've been around at dinner parties in London with people who are still pissed about the enclosure of the commons and who really believe that the land is for everybody to share. And, obviously like there's lots of overlap with this and like, not to speak about Indigenous cultures like they're a monolith, but, some Indigenous belief systems. And it really was, one of the factors that was a causative factor in the witch hunts where, in the Pendle witches, which is in part 1, the gardening chapter, like those witches were living, they probably didn't they kind of did self-identify as witches, to be fair, but they were living off the land. They were surviving off the forest and living on the edge of the forest. And so when King James decided to restrict access to the forest because he was going to fell it because he needed to build more ships, like that pushed this group of people further into poverty. And that's when you see the kind of uprisings happen. And that's when you see the political system go, actually, hold on, we want to control you. Now you're in trouble. You're witches.
It sounds so familiar.
Doesn't it?
Wow.
Yeah.
Good witch is broken up into 5 categories: gardener, gossip, spinster, healer, and nymph. How did you land on these 5 categories?
So when I wrote the book proposal back in 2023, it kind of came out of me formed like along those structures. So it was always, but I didn't have the specific words yet. So it was like the first part was going to be gardening, the second part was going to be friendship, then it would be textile work, then it would be medicine, and the 5th part was like connection to the natural world. But it wasn't until I had a kind of moment when I was doing the structural rewrite where I was like, okay, well, actually this is really about the women and what they were doing. And I really felt this like need to kind of center them more. And gardener, gossip, spinster, healer were like lightning bolts. Like they came through really quickly. Gossip felt like a good one because, your best friends used to be your gossips, and they've really, the etymology of that word changed over the course of the witch hunts. And now, we see it, it means something so derogatory to be a gossip, but actually just meant that we were like best pals. And yeah, spinster, also a spinster again, like was just somebody who was really good at spinning yarn. And now also the etymology of that word has changed to mean a woman that's been left on the shelf basically. And healer is also self-explanatory. Nymph took longer to come through. Like I was really it wasn't really until I was reworking that part of the book and really like, well, these other categories just have the woman, like she stepped into her power. But the nymph was, I was like drawing out folk tales and kind of looking back, trying to find an example of how this character had changed, like this idea of a woman who was in touch with nature. And then it's so funny that now the Odyssey is coming out as well because it took me to back to the Odyssey and and that was kind of it. But sometimes I think with those creative things, you've got to get a bit lucky and you've got to get a bit of a download. But I'm very proud of them. I love those categories.
Yeah. And you probably need some boundary as well because it's such a massive topic.
Yes.
Why was it the witches in Europe and America that you specifically wanted to research?
That was, I feel like they were the ones who asked me to, if that makes sense. So witch hunts are still happening now and they've happened all over the world, but it was, for me, like, because you're right, it was like an exercise constantly in narrowing the scope because there's, only so much. It could be 5 PhDs.
Yeah.
And King James stepped up very early on as the bad guy in the narrative arc. And so that gave me a tight framework, basically. So he comes into power at the end of the 1500s and and then Salem is the end of the 1600s. And Salem also felt important to me to include because it's got this huge presence in our pop culture, basically. And then also what you get around that time is the colonialism and the expansion. And so you see the ideas that they get they're spreading through Europe and, it's like religious, it's political, it's neighborly as well. And then they get transported across the seas into, this expansion to the New World. And that to me was like also a really powerful expression of what we see in the lead up to industrialization with how colonial powers start to kind of take over. And it felt like a way to connect all these stories. But honestly, really, there were so many, I mean, like there's 80 to 100,000 trials, and they didn't start in Scotland where the story starts. They started in, Italy and Switzerland, and it really could have gone, like it could have gone much wider, but to build the argument and the case and to really explore the impacts, it felt important to me that there was this narrative thread you could pull through. For example, Joan of Arc kept popping up like over and over and over again. Like you would not believe the amount of coincidences where it was like, put Joan of Arc in the book. Like, but she was in the 14th century, 1300s, and she was tried for witchcraft, but she wasn't convicted of witchcraft. And even like I had a meeting with the NGV this week because we're going to do a talk in October about the book, because Alexander McQueen is descendant from Elizabeth Howe, who's in the Salem witches. And, at the meeting they were like, oh yeah, but he's also got a collection about Joan of Arc in addition to the collection about the Salem witches. And I was like, okay, get it.
You're like, another book maybe.
So we'll do her in that one too. But yeah, so it did feel, it was like an exercise in just constantly trying to keep it focused.
Yeah. And in each chapter, you kind of go through a similar pattern where you will look at some specific women who were tried for witchcraft. I'm curious, how do you feel about referring to them as witches? Like, do you think they would have liked that? A lot of the time it's these women who are, connected to the natural world or who excel in women's work. How do you sit there?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I feel like now there's so much pride around the idea of being associated with being a witch. Like almost every woman I talk to about this book is like, I would have been burnt at the stake as a witch.
Yeah.
We're
gossip. We have a podcast. We're gossip.
Totally. And I think, but back then it was very dangerous. It was so dangerous to be called a witch. It was so dangerous. And like these demonological theories that pop up all through the trials were extremely dangerous too to know about. So I know they probably wouldn't. They wouldn't want to self-identify, aware of the risk, but at the same time, like. The Pendle witches, definitely had a reputation for casting spells. And so Catherine Harrison, self-proclaimed to be a student of a very famous astrologer, like Agnes Sampson in Scotland. She was a wise woman, she was a healer. And so, but she obviously getting called a witch was a huge problem for her. So, there's a very gray area, and obviously our understanding of what the word witch has evolved a long way, because now I feel like people want to wear it as a badge of honor. And I hope that means something, if they are listening, I hope that means something. I hope that feels like a source of pride for them, and they're not like, hey, this got us fucking killed.
I want to read an extract from another page early on in the book. Before the witch hunts, women were part of a community-based workforce embedded in cooperation. They spun yarn, worked as healers, gardened, and kept animals. But after the witch hunts, they were excluded from professional guilds and the formal training that underpinned disciplines like weaving and medicine. While patriarchy existed before the witch hunts, the subjugation of women was exacerbated by the shift away from agrarian communal structures. How did the witch hunt stunt women's professional lives?
God, it's such a big question. Okay, so like if we take spinning as an example, so if you were lots of women spun yarn, it was a very common way for women to make money. But we see, like I spoke about before, how the spindle becomes part of the iconography of witch hunts. But in addition to that, so there's like a couple of different frameworks that are moving at the same time. And so one of them is this kind of social attitude towards spinners or spinsters. So we see in the artwork of the time, and also in plays like in Shakespeare, we see spinning become associated with prostitution, because they're trying to they're stigmatizing the profession and basically saying, if you're working as a woman, it's dishonorable. And there's a couple of great woodcuts that I reference in the book where you see a spinning room kind of basically be depicted as a brothel. And in Shakespeare, there's examples of characters talking about a distaff and spinning like it's a phallic metaphor essentially. So there's that. So it becomes increasingly dangerous if you're a woman to be earning money outside the home because you risk basically drawing the ire of other people in your community. And we see in the trial of Catherine Harrison that actually when she's being accused by her neighbours of being a witch, one of their complaints is that she's too good at spinning yarn. I mean, that was a complicated trial. There was lots of stuff going on and bad actors, but she, so in that way, then once it's become dangerous for you to have this set of skills, you're less likely to want to work outside the home, and also that work becomes devalued. And we see with spinning, we see the extension of that devaluation right up, like all the way through the Industrial Revolution. And I believe that's why garment workers are still paid so little today. Although that's a harder one to play out with research. Healing is another really great example. Like, it's so many women were healers in their communities all the way through, prior to the witch hunts and continuing through the witch hunts and the Renaissance. But we see in this example, we see the church decree that any woman who's practicing magic, practicing healing rather, is calling on supernatural powers and therefore should be condemned as a witch. We see them get excluded. So they were allowed to train. They trained there was this university in Italy, and the doctors that trained there were called the Ladies of Salerno. And we see laws get passed that mean that they can no longer get the formal education that's required to be a doctor. And so sometimes it's overt. Like with healing, it's extremely overt. It was like, if you're doing this and you're a woman, you're a witch. And, it's like clear as day written in the law. But and with spinning, it's kind of more subtle. But really what it meant was that by the time we get to the Industrial Revolution, all of these puritanical kind of structures that say that a woman needs to be in the home and that the man goes out and earns some money are like very much at play.
Because that's what I was reading the book, like, oh my gosh, so many of our structures, like the devaluation of women's work and the fact that we're paid less than men still to this day, it does feel like it stems, it's all interconnected from around the witch hunt times.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
100%. Because also so it's like the Industrial Revolution comes in and say with medicine, what that means is we've had the scientific revolution and you're starting to establish the principles of modern medicine off the back of the exclusion of women. So it's a vacuum for women's knowledge and women's contributions, and it's like the perfect storm where then you accelerate it with all of these modern discoveries. And so we leap forward 200 years when women are allowed back in the middle of the 19th century. And, so much has happened that's already going in the favor of men that we're still at a disadvantage now because it's only 150 years on from that. And, medicine is just such a great example because obviously women weren't included in clinical trials until the 1990s, which is just like, so we don't even have we've got no good data, and, medical misogyny is a whole other thing, but but it's linked. All of it's linked.
It reminds me of, there was a quote that you also brought into your book. You might have to correct me because I don't have it in front of me, but somebody was like, why did they do this? They must have had to fear women so much for this to happen. And it's just, because it's baffling. It infuriates me, I think.
Yes.
That's how I feel reading some of the things that, we're reading things that happened hundreds of years ago, yet it's still so relevant to today.
Yeah. And it is infuriating. But then when you see women, we're really stepping into so much power now, and you see the way that they're trying to shut us up, whether it's reproductive rights or like the pushback against Me Too or the rise of the tradwife movement, like it is the concerted effort that the patriarchy has to put in to suppressing our power and our innate goodness and, our ability to have these beautiful friendships and to be empathetic and intuitive and understand each other and make something beautiful. These are things, it's like, I sometimes think well, it's no wonder they had to basically enslave us to marry them because of course it's, you want a woman around, we're so desirable. I feel for men because, straight single men, their lives are like empty husks. Where are your books? Where's your art?
Yeah.
Why don't you know how to cook anything?
There's a great scene where you and a friend go to a party with the man's party, and then you go back really quickly that was awful.
It was like
Get us back to
terrible.
the glasses with the stars on them and like whimsy.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Do you think that the rise of whimsy is also a part of this? I feel like online there's so much talk about like whimsy and beautifying things. Do you think that is an intuitive like aspect of women like wanting to have that power back again?
Yeah, I hope so. Because like if feminine things have so much power in them. Like I saw Pamela Anderson speak at the Global Fashion Summit, and she was advocating for political change, but she was doing it in this like, she's so charismatic. She's so beautiful. Like she's got this softness to her voice and like just commanding the attention of the room in this way where I was like, no wonder they're trying to squash this all the time. And yeah, we should be embracing what's powerful about our femininity 100%. And whimsy's whimsy's super persuasive. Let's have some more whimsy.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we don't hear femininity being put in the same sentence as powerful much unless it's perhaps by men yielding it as something like, you're using it.
Or sexuality.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
conflating the two.
But in what ways for you have you seen that femininity can be powerful?
Oh my gosh, I just think it's so powerful. I think it's so powerful all the time. Like I don't know, like, and you feel it, like you feel it when you look really beautiful. You feel the power that has over not just men around you, but women and children, like over everything. Like it's so I should probably stop hitting the mic. It's extremely powerful. And, I think too, like there are examples that pop up online of, women in the States disarming gunmen by giving them a hug, and like protecting schools from school. You watch somebody, how they respond when you go and treat them with compassion and kindness and empathy and respect and like, or even just like a hot bath with some rose petals, like and a little glass of wine and some nice music. Like there's we just know how to make life. We know how to take the edge off life. And I think that's really, that's not to be underestimated, even though they've literally spent like the last 300 years being like, that's got no value. That's got no economic value, but get into my house and do it for me for free.
Yes. Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
You briefly talked about the definition of gossip and how that changed over time. Another word you talk about in the book is the word glamour. Can you please tell listeners how that's changed as well?
So basically in the 18th century, that was like a Scottish word. It's evolved from a Scottish word, gramarye, which I'm sure I'm saying incorrectly, which meant to cast a spell over the eye. And I just find that so interesting because, we love fashion and having spent so much of my life, talking about how clothes transform and how they make you feel certain ways. I find it so fascinating that like this idea that you would cast a spell has then, evolved over time to mean glamour and glamorous, which, I think is also, again, a very powerful feminine trait, but we have also come to deride it as, superficial and just like, very hollow, which I think is just so unfair. But we see just constantly with these words, like how their association with femininity becomes like, links them to witchcraft and then kind of what happens afterwards. Like it runs through our whole lives, this concept of magic and the fact that like they basically had to hunt us for 300 years to get us to stop believing in it is very interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I feel like one of the big North Stars of your book is a quote by scholar Silvio Federici, who wrote, "The world had to be disenchanted in order to be dominated."
I know.
Oh,
brutal, isn't it?
Brutal. Do you think we've done that?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, people don't believe in magic anymore. Before the witch hunts, there were three main dominant belief systems: religion, science, and magic. And now we just have religion and science and not really, religion's questionable at the moment. And yeah, and we don't, especially, it's not true that it's not universal, but if we're talking about it from the perspective of kind of Australians, white Australians existing in this country, like I am, it's very much, it's treated like you're a bit cuckoo. When I initially started telling people I was writing about witches, there were kind of two schools. There were people like you who were like, I'm a witch. Tell me everything you know. And then there were people who were like, oh, that's cute. Oh, that's a bit quirky, you know? And it's like, oh, like who, and obviously, which I hated, but I also you learn very quickly who the book is for and who isn't. But I do think that's like the dominant attitude. And even the fact that we are so far away from feeling like we have any obligation to forests and, you know, the oceans that we're so proud of, and, you know, just these incredible landscapes that we exist in that feed us, that clothe us, that, you know, get to dictate how comfortable we are as we go about our days. And we have, I feel like there is almost zero respect for the natural world. And then when you try to, like, that's embodied, you know, in our societies, but when you start talking to people about it, especially our forests in Australia, like when you go to a forest in Europe, it is like, what the hell? This is not a forest. Like, these trees are so small and they are all the same type and age. And like, where is the wildlife? I can't see any birds. And, you know, and when you go into a forest, like an Australian forest, it's a spiritual experience. You know, it's silent. It's like this completely, like, you know, it's olfactory. It's like just these other sensations. And I really don't think that we appreciate how enchanting that stuff is, and we don't even label it like that, you know? It's like, oh yeah, it's nice to go into the deep bush, get away from it all.
And you're so right. On that note, can we get you to please read out a section which I think nicely expands on that?
Yeah, sure. We have lost sight of something our lives depend on. We are nature. We cannot survive unstable, volatile, and extreme weather events. We cannot escape the impact of rising sea levels and deadly heat waves. Without clean air, healthy soil, rivers, forests, lakes, oceans, and meadows, both mentally and physically, we will meet the limits to our existence. Science has shown us all the way our bodies are connected to nature. Our blood has a concentration of salt and other ions that is remarkably similar to seawater. When we go outside into nature, studies show our heart rate and blood pressure drops within seconds, and that the stress hormone cortisol drops after 20 to 30 minutes. Exposure to birdsong has been proven to alleviate symptoms of anxiety and paranoia. Being near bodies of water reduces heart rate and blood pressure and enhances feelings of relaxation. Walking barefoot on the earth has been connected with improved sleep quality and reduced inflammation. Exposure to sunlight stimulates serotonin in the brain and is essential for mood and circadian rhythm alignment. Like the dryads of the woods, naiads of the caves, and nereids of the sea, this is our home. And deciding to dominate and destroy the planet has always been patently short-sighted and foolish.
I love it. I think it's something that you're quite good at, Maggie, incorporating nature into your life. And I think I treat nature like rest, in that it's like a nice to have and you can do it once everything else is done. And like, have you completed all your obviously work tasks, but like your caring tasks, and like make sure your friends are all okay? Have you spent enough time with them? And then only then will I go into nature. But sometimes you feel it, which is like, I grew up by the beach. And so now I'm like, I need to be in a body of salt water. And like getting in touch with that feeling of, intuition, I think is totally witchy.
100%.
And something that's been like pushed down. Like, no, you have to do your productive capitalist tasks first before you can go to the beach. And it's like so luxurious to be on a beach.
Yeah, which is not, we're not designed to live like that. I heard a podcast with Michael Pollan where he talked about new research that I should have looked up before I started talking about this, where he talked about new research that shows that so much of our consciousness isn't actually in the brain, it's in the body. But like, we're living in this world, and you know, Descartes was one of the philosophers during the Renaissance that I write about in the book, and he is, I think, therefore I am, you know, which is like very much like we are superior, the superior beings, because we live in the mind. And they're so wrong. Like, we should be listening to, tapping in and being like, what is my gut instinct about this? What does my body actually want, and what it's telling me that I need today, and stop like living so much in the brain.
So true. And to that nature point as well, because I know some listeners will be like, oh, I live in such an urban area. There's not much nature around. I kind of relate to that too. But I think finding just moments with plant life that could just literally be like the tree in your, like when you're on the nature strip in your neighbor's house and things like that can be so special. I have a really fond memory of one of me and a friend, we were just out, not in a particularly nice nature spot, but she would every so often just stop, go talk to a tree, give a tree a hug, especially if it was like a big, like old growth tree. And seeing that play out, I was like, that is magic. And that was
Yeah.
such a beautiful connection point that we can all lean into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you get energy, I always try to, because I'm not in nature that often, when I'm on a bushwalk, I will go up to old trees as well and like put my hands on it and just like have a moment, and you feel the power. But I can feel myself already being like, oh, not to be a hippie or like not to be all woo-woo. You can feel that like misogynistic side already coming up, talking about it.
Yeah. Be woo-woo. Let's go.
Love it.
Yeah.
We're almost finishing up, but we would like to ask, how do you recommend us all getting in touch with our witchy sides?
Oh, wow. What a beautiful question. I think, you did a solstice ritual. I think that's something really beautiful, something to connect with the seasons. I love a tarot card deck. Like, even just pulling one card and seeing what it's like, how it speaks to you, I think is really good. Definitely. I mean, I love a good somatic workout to get into the body. And a friend of mine teaches these classes called Burn, which I think is very witchy. And I also, because it's usually a room full of mostly women, and there's like heavy breathing that's going on, and like you're tapping into some really high feminine energy, like collectively all together, which I think is also a great way to be witchy. Oh my God, there's so many ways. I think also like at the moment, there's so many beautiful rainbow lorikeets around, and to me, just like kind of listening to them in the mornings, also I feel like gives me a good sense. Go outside, look at the moon. I don't know. Everything.
Yeah, everything is witchy.
Everything is witchy.
Every week on our podcast, we give our listeners recommendations of something we've loved watching, reading, or listening to that week. Can you please share a recommendation that you've been loving?
Ooh, I mean, I'm a big House of the Dragons fan at the moment. I think anything that's like a little bit removed. I couldn't do The Pit. It gave me too much anxiety, but it's a Game of Thrones sequel, and I just love Emma Darcy. They are just like, just so
cool.
phenomenal. I saw them do a reading of Maggie Nelson's Bluettes in London once, and I was really like, it was an amazing experience. So yeah, that would be my rec.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sitting down with us, Lucianne. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you guys. I really, it's so nice to talk to people who are so engaged by the text, and I'm really impressed by your questions.
Oh, we're teachers' pets, so that means a lot to us. Replaying that audio.
Where can people find more of your work and your book?
So I write in ELLE and The Guardian and then the Saturday paper, like you mentioned. I have a Substack called The Line. Obviously, you can buy Good Witch. I implore you to buy Good Witch. And you can still buy Sundressed too. That's around. So yeah, I'm around.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for your time.
That's so nice.